Deixando aí a tela de boas-vindas. Para quem vai chegando, esse evento vai ter tradução simultânea, vocês podem ver ali o botão da interpretação. Vamos entrando.
Good afternoon, many greets from Barcelona. Hey, Bob.
Olá!
Long time.
Yeah, good to see you. Thank you
Que
for being here.
maravilha! Eu, então, queria pedir para que vocês pudessem colocar, muitas pessoas já estão colocando um bom dia, boa tarde no chat, que coloquem de onde vocês estão falando, de que cidade, de que país, para a gente ir vendo nessa festa que a gente está construindo aqui nesse mundo virtual. Vou até parar de compartilhar para a gente se ver melhor. Que vocês possam colocar de onde vocês estão vindo. Olha lá, São Paulo, aqui falando de Porto Alegre, do Pampa, né? Do bairro ali do Uruguai, Rio de Janeiro. Quem mais? Opa, Bebedouro, Elza, que legal. Johannesburg, Tailândia, gente, que coisa mais deliciosa. Recife, Pindamonhangaba. Gente, que maravilha! Venezuela, Nova York, Botucatu, não estou conseguindo ler tudo, tá? São Paulo, muita gente de São Paulo, legal. A gente sabe que São Paulo tem essa super presença, né? Santa Catarina. Cincinnati. Oi, Val! Nossa, tudo bom, Val? Rio Claro. Gente, que coisa boa! Que coisa boa! Ter essa sensação de que a gente vai chegando, que a gente tem essa maravilha da tecnologia, que não é só, né, esse cansaço que a gente já está do Zoom, mas a possibilidade da gente fazer essa festa gigantesca, ó, até Tel Aviv, Montreal, passando para falar que é super importante que vocês localizem o botão de interpretação de vocês, escolham, né, escutar ou no áudio original, ou em português, ou em espanhol. Nós vamos começar a festa de hoje escutando um vídeo bem bacana sobre o que é isso que a gente está fazendo junto aqui. Então, lá vai.
It's time to connect. It's time to celebrate. International Coaching Week, a worldwide celebration and an opportunity to learn, grow, and experience professional coaching. During International Coaching Week, we encourage individuals and organizations all over the world to understand, explore, test, and discover the possibilities coaching provides. Join us for hundreds of events in dozens of languages all over the world.
Excelente, pessoal. Muito obrigada. Bom, como todos os eventos, né, da ICF, enfim, a gente vai pedir para todo mundo cuidar dos seus microfones, para a gente cuidar, né, que todos possam escutar com tranquilidade. Esse momento que a gente vai estar junto aqui com o Bob. Eu queria já, em nome da ICF, né, desejar que todos sejam muito bem-vindos. Para quem não me conhece, eu sou a Marta Magnus, eu sou coach generativa, consultora generativa. Aqui dentro da ICF faço parte desde 2009, junto com as minhas companheiras aí do Rio Grande do Sul, a Ana Paula e a Tita, a gente tem se envolvido com a gestão da ICF, seja Rio Grande do Sul, a Ana Paula também na Brasil, nos últimos anos. No ano passado eu tirei minha credencial MCC, o que eu tenho assim muito orgulho, não de o fato de ser uma MCC, mas por ter uma trajetória cuidando do coaching, né, que a gente sabe que andou aí super mal visto, mal falado, mas que a gente tem muito carinho e muito orgulho, né, de poder ter um ofício que cuida de pessoas, porque se a gente não vai cuidar de pessoas, a gente não vai cuidar do futuro, né, do nosso mundão aí. Como vocês sabem, a International Coaching Federation é a maior associação global de coaching, presente em mais de 100 países. Hoje conta com mais de 50 mil associados ao redor do mundo inteiro. Haja vista essa festa linda que está acontecendo aqui hoje. E essa Semana Internacional do Coaching é a maior celebração do coaching profissional do mundo, e nessa semana estão acontecendo cerca de 1000 eventos em mais de 20 idiomas. E só nessa sala a gente vai ter 13 idiomas funcionando simultaneamente: português, inglês e espanhol. Eu gostaria de agradecer a todos vocês associados, aos líderes regionais, aos comitês, ao Conselho Deliberativo, ao Comitê de Educação, às pessoas envolvidas com a organização da ICW, às pessoas do back-office. Aqui eu coloco no nome da Clélia, né, que é a nossa grande cuidadora, né, de todos os processos da ICF. E queria dar boas-vindas a quem é que vai estar com a gente hoje. Falando no nome desta pessoa, né, que eu sempre me emociono em falar dele, o Bob, que além dele ser o fundador da liderança generativa, para mim ele é um exemplo de alguém que segue aprendendo, um eterno aprendiz, de uma inteireza e de uma integridade tão grande e de uma verdade quando se trata em cuidar de pessoas dentro de organizações. Ele é o fundador também do IDL, que é um Instituto para a Liderança Generativa, e hoje nós estamos aqui como IDL Latam, que é o braço da América Latina, liderado pela nossa querida Maribel Gonzalez, que hoje não está aqui conosco, mas que nós estamos representados por todo o time, Bea, Glória, que é a alma da IDL Latam, e aqui como IDL Latam Brasil, Tita, Ana e eu, como essas 3 gurias, né, que vocês podem nos chamar assim, porque a gente é do Sul, e nós estamos absolutamente comprometidas em trazer a liderança generativa para o Brasil como parte de IDL Latam, ou seja, América Latina. Nós somos latino-americanos com os nossos hermanos, embora a gente fale essa língua diferente, muito musical, chamada português. Temos aqui também Bea e Maria, que são as nossas tradutoras, que vão fazer essa ponte linguística para que todos podamos desfrutar dessa maravilhosa celebração aqui. A Ana e a Tita vão ser nossos apoios hoje, e eu vou ser a sua mestre de cerimônias, né? Esse evento, pessoal, ele vai contar com créditos de educação continuada. A gente vai mandar bem no finalzinho da apresentação o link para vocês poderem pedir o certificado de vocês. E também ali vai ter instruções se vocês quiserem fazer uma avaliação do evento, produzir algum tipo de vídeo para poder veicular da experiência que vocês tiveram com esse evento. E a gente espera que realmente essa experiência seja a mais bacana possível. O evento, eu vou falar de novo porque tem ainda gente entrando, ele conta com tradução simultânea para português, espanhol e inglês. Se vocês puderem, gurias, colocar de novo, né, como que as pessoas acedem ao botão da interpretação, seria ótimo. E agora vamos falar do Bob, né? O Bob, então, é o fundador do Institute for Generative Leadership, que desenvolve coaches, líderes, consultores, gerentes, executivos, numa disciplina chamada liderança generativa. O Bob vem trabalhando desde 1981 como executivo, consultor, educador e coach de executivos, times e coaches ao redor do mundo inteiro. Antes de fundar o IDL, o Bob foi vice-presidente da Motorola, COO da Action Technology, vice-presidente da Consulting for Business Design Associates. Bob também é coautor de 2 livros, eu não vou mencionar agora para não tirar a graça, e ele também está explorando atualmente as tradições da sabedoria chinesa por sua contribuição para a compreensão e incorporação na liderança generativa. Hoje o Bob vai nos brindar o tema Transformando Times e Organizações a partir da liderança generativa, um novo olhar sobre o team coaching. Esse tema que está tão quente, né, hoje com essa nova família da ICF, e como que a gente vai desenhar esse novo jogo, né, de estarmos atuando como coaches junto a times e organizações. E o Bob vai trazer, então, toda a sua maestria e experiência ao longo de mais de 4 décadas trabalhando com coaching de times e organizações. O Bob vai ter um espaço de explanação, ele vai contar várias coisas para nós e depois a gente vai abrir para perguntas no final. Então, vocês vieram ver o Bob, não a mim. Então, Bob, here's the mic for you. Go ahead. Onward.
Fantastic. Hello. I want everybody to give me high tens. We need to connect. So lean in and get some eye contact and welcome to the conversation. I first of all want to apologize for not being able to speak to you in your beautiful languages. But the fact that we have fantastic translators allows us to have this conversation. And I think it shows how important the conversation is, that we need to be able to speak from different cultures to deal with a world that needs to be supported with a new level of leadership and a new level of coaching. So with that, I'm going to give you a leadership practice. This is the most important leadership practice of all that we're going to be practicing during this conversation together. It's called breathing. So I'm going to ask you to take a deep breath, really, and feel it all the way down to your hips, and then relax on the exhale. And the reason this is an important leadership practice, and of course, leadership happens in life. It's a life practice. It is the practice of becoming present. And what we have found, leaders have to go into triggering situations. They have to face dragons. You have the moments of life, and taking that deep breath and relaxing the body allows you to open and be present to the moment. And so I'm going to ask you to take the deep breath again, because I'll be asking you to do it on occasion during the conversation. Take the deep breath, but I want you to relax, open, and become present. Part of this is to get out of your head. Yet, so if my invitation to this practice was, oh, Bob's weird, this is crazy, why are we doing this? That's a moment where I want you to let go, to be present to the moment. So are you ready to play? Fantastic. All right. So let's begin our conversation. This conversation, the topic is the power of generative leadership, but the purpose of this conversation is to empower you as a coach, to empower you as a leader, to empower you to take care of what you care about and produce an impact in the world. So I'm going to share some slides, images that will help our conversation. And we're going to take a journey into some new territory and new perspectives. And so I have so many windows. And so for most of you, this is a new perspective. And in beginning this conversation, I want to give my thanks to ICF Brazil. And I particularly want to thank our generative practitioners in Brazil, Marta Magnus, Ana Paula Schmitz, and Tita Barreto. That's a word I learned today. My first Portuguese word. So fantastic. And so let's take a look at what this new perspective can open and enable for us as coaches. The Institute for Generative Leadership, which I founded in 1993, is an organization that has specialized in the world of organizations. We specialize in leadership, teams, organizations, and there is some variations and additions to coaching skills that we have learned that allows us to talk about generative coaching, which is consistent with ICF coaching. It comes from the roots of ontological coaching, and it has a relationship there. And what we do is we show the world of leadership, the world of organizations, not as a technical world of technique. The enemy in our culture today is the mechanical metaphor. We are seeing a world that's being dominated by people who see the world in mechanical terms and then begin to treat people and themselves as units of production. And we're going to step back and then re-enter seeing the world of action and leadership as a world where human beings are creating the future together to take care of something that they care about. So recently, in the last couple of years, ICF has created criteria for team coaching. We have the opportunity now for certification. I'm delighted to see that advance. And when you read the criteria for team coaching, they say something very important. The coaching conversation maintains its integrity, but you also have to go beyond ICF coaching. You need to add team development modalities, is what they call them. You may need to deal with focusing on the impact of somatics on teams, or emotions, or communication. And there's an additional level that's not mentioned in the document. That is what we're going to talk about today, the contribution that generative leadership can make in the world of organizations. And that is that there's not just the coaching conversation and developmental modalities. There is an important question. What is the structure that creates a team? What is the structure of leadership? What is the structure of an organization? What is essential? And this question comes from the ontological tradition. In the ontological tradition, we begin with the question, what is something? Because the perspective of ontology is what creates reality? What creates a team? Not just what is a team, but what creates it. And because of that perspective is where the word generative came from. What are the interpretations that allow us to see how a team is created in action, not just describe it after it's created? And so we're going to go into this generative perspective, look with some new eyes. Again, it's an ad. It's not a competition with ICF coaching guidelines. It's coherent with them. We include ICF coaching in our work. This is the logo of the Institute for Generative Leadership. It represents a human being. You see that dot in the middle is kind of rough. It's your center. It's the center of you biologically, physiologically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. And the swoosh is the capacity we have as human beings to connect to energy, to go down to the ground so that we're in reality, but then go out into possibility and create with others. And we're going to refer to the kind of coaching that we have learned is needed in the domain of leadership as generative coaching. The basic idea here is there are different kinds of coaching conversations. And the coaching conversation that was developed for ICF, I was with some of the founders of ontological coaching in the 1980s. Fernando Flores, Julio Laya, Rafael Echeverria, we all worked together in the 1980s. And coaching was a breakthrough in that era because the culture was dominated with attention to the external world. The internal world of the human being was missing. And coaching was a powerful conversation to have people become aware that they have choice, to begin to have a voice, to empower them. And that is how the criteria were invented. But what we found in our exploration of leadership is there are additional coaching conversations that are needed in different phases. One is if we're going to enter a domain of action, we need to know how to be the observer in that domain of action. We need to know how to be and that is not something that we learn through questions. You don't learn to be a physician in medical school by simply being asked, what do you think anatomy is? You are taught anatomy, and then you're given questions. What can you do with this way of observing? And that's what we found in leadership, that people don't know what it is, and that we need to introduce that perspective, and then there's room for the personal internal coaching. I want to share with you where generative leadership came from and my journey and as part of this discipline and community. And it started for me in 1981. I was a software engineer in Silicon Valley, and I was in a company that was metaphorically burning down. They had not gotten a product out the door for years, and that's a death sentence in Silicon Valley. Technology needs to be new, and they weren't doing it. And people were leaving the company in large numbers. And I was in this company as a software engineer, also in this moment of life saying, what am I going to do with my life? And I decided I was going to take a stand for excellence. And I began to talk about, what do we need to do in this company? And this was my courageous entry into the conversation. How do you change an organization? And so with that, what I discovered was I didn't know what to do. I didn't see how to be a leader. I didn't see how to be a coach. I didn't know how to address this situation in the world of organization. This is not an uncommon experience today with leaders, with managers, with professionals, with company owners. They know what they know, they do what they do, and when the challenges and breakdowns come, they're not sure what to do. But I was introduced to a new perspective. And this new perspective allowed me to see how to change the fate of the organization. And I'm going to share that. That perspective has been embodied in the foundations of generative leadership ever since. And so in 1981, I began to have new conversations. And some of them, we didn't call it coaching in 1981. But we, looking back, they were coaching conversations. And this company that I was in, I was given the opportunity to be a program manager, which meant I was responsible for delivery of products. I was in charge of coordinating the actions of 22 managers with 250 engineers working on 35 products. And as I said, they hadn't been able to get a product out the door for 2.5 years. And based on this new perspective that I ran into by luck, in 6 months, we delivered all 35 products on time, on budget, 10 times higher quality than had ever been achieved before. And it happened by changing the conversations through leadership conversations and coaching conversations. So I'm going to share some of that. But that's where this generative tradition began. And what I learned was perspectives that were taught by Fernando Flores. I attended a workshop. It was called the Communication for Action workshop. And they asked a question in that workshop that was a shock. They said, "What is action?" And my first reaction was, well, I didn't study the chapter last night. I don't know if I'm going to pass the quiz. Then I said, oh, everybody knows what action is. We do it every day. And then that was the moment of awakening. I said, I really don't know. I do stuff, but I really don't have a very powerful interpretation of what action is. And they proceeded to offer a new interpretation that I never, ever would have guessed without being guided. So in the coaching sense, this is the opening introduction to a domain, a new domain of performance where you need to show the domain before the person has competence for choices. Dr. Flores invented this field of ontological design, and I was not only a student of that field, I went to work in his companies for 7 years, where I did my apprenticeship in elevating coaching. My first assignment in 1986 was to be the coach of a group of 60 people. And so I also learned in 1981, I had to coach my team in order for us to perform at a new level of teamwork. And that's why I say I began coaching in 1981, which was 14 years before ICF was founded. And then being a part of Fernando's company, I was working with Julio Alaya, the founder of Newfield Network, along with Rafael. He has, if you know about Newfield, and many of you are probably graduates, he has developed a new framework, a new context of how we know things from the emotional point of view. Very powerful. He's a fundamental co-founder of the ontological coaching tradition. And Newfield is, of course, active in Latin America, the US, and around the world. I was also had the privilege to work with Rafael Echeverria in the late 80s, who founded Newfield Consulting, who's also been recognized as a originator of ontological coaching. He wrote that wonderful book, Ontología del Lenguaje, that I managed to do a translation to appreciate the beautiful work he did. And so let me speak to get a sense of the generative perspective that we're exploring here. Let me speak about how it arises from the same roots as the ontological coaching tradition, and what is the overlap and what is different between ontological coaching and generative coaching. This field was developed by Dr. Flores, and he drew on many other thinkers. Maturana and Varela and the whole field of biology became fundamental. This is where the body and embodiment, speech acts, the philosophy of Martin Heidegger, the study of emotions with Robert Solomon, martial arts from Richard Strozzi Heckler. These were thinkers that I was exposed to in the 1980s by Fernando as he brought them into creating this discourse of ontological design. And Julio and Rafael and I were working together. We developed courses and were active. And they went on to develop their powerful offers in the world of ontological coaching based on the foundations of the question of what is a human being. I also drew from the ontological roots to develop generative leadership, where it includes everything that the ontological coaching tradition, but it begins with the question, what is action? And how do human beings take action together? And then we bring the human being into that work. So with these roots, in the ontological tradition, the focus is the freedom and awareness of having choice in the world of emotions, and where we begin the journey in generative leadership is the coordination of action. What is happening out there with others in the world? The observer of yourself in the world in the ontological coaching tradition is also augmented in generative leadership with an observer of what is action and the anatomy of action. And both perspectives come to deal with people in life where the ontological tradition is about transforming your awareness to create choice from an emotional foundation to allow you to shift your experience of your life and your relationship with others. And in the generative tradition, we include that, but we provide the context of the coordination of action, of going into the we space, not just me and how it affects others, but what is the structure of people together? And we go deeply into the emotional world with the internal experiences of care and commitment, which I'm going to speak about a little more later. And so just some highlights of me. I began coaching in 1981 because I had to. I couldn't get my team to perform in a new way without coaching them. I had to show them the world and give them their freedom in this new world. And then I worked for 7 years with Fernando. I actually developed and wrote under direction the second year of the ontological design course and developed a 1-year program in leadership. I founded the Institute for Generative Leadership in '93. We began to develop public programs in generative leadership in 1998. In 2008, we launched the program Coaching Excellence in Organizations, where we integrated coaching and leadership. And the original version of this was launched with Newfield, and it's now maintained by the Institute. And in 2013, we founded the Institute for Generative Leadership in India and Asia. And the IGL Latin America was founded with Mary Bell Gonzalez in 2019. I also was a request as I was preparing this PowerPoint, a request was made to mention the books that are available. And the team is putting links into the chat. You can order these books on Amazon to get a Kindle version if you're interested. In 2022, last December, we published a book called The Power of Owning Up, which is about responsibility, owning up to your responsibilities. And it's an organizational focus on what is responsibility, what is accountability, how are they different? But it's rooted in the human experience of responsibility, which is an empowerment of the power of declaring that you're going to take care of something, no matter what shows up as a challenge. In 2010, I developed and co-authored the book, The Innovator's Way, which is with Dr. Peter Denning, and it's a book about the power of innovation and how, and again, it's an ontological perspective. What creates innovation? What is innovation? How do you do innovation? And it's a set of conversations. And so the power of the innovation perspective is it is generative, because generative means it's an action you can see and do and learn that produces the outcome. And so it's a powerful perspective on innovation. So to wrap up here with generative leadership, helping people transform, going from the caterpillar to being able to fly. Our coaching program has been called Coaching Excellence in Organizations, and team coaching is part of that. And we provide 3 certifications from ICF with CCEUs, and we actually have 3 one-year options for learning. And there's also a generative leadership program that's offered in the US. Our experience over these decades is we've had thousands of participants in our learning experience, and we have over 500 graduates of our 3-year program. And if 3 years sounds like a lot, remember your original coach training took time. And so when you are committed to be a professional in a discipline, it takes time. And what we have learned over the years is to be a leader, to be a coach of leaders, to be a coach in organizations is a profession. And our commitment is to enable people to develop their skills in these professions to a standard of professionalism, which means you can make valuable promises and fulfill them. That's what the intent here is to enable our coaching impact. So let's look at what is this observer, this perspective, this ability to transform leaders, teams, and organizations that we're introducing. So we speak about generative coaching. What is that perspective? The first is we begin with the human being. We don't begin with a technical perspective. We don't begin with the external world. We don't begin with its process and here's what you do. We begin with the human being. We go in. We want to transform organizations, leadership, and management to begin with the human being because it has often been preempted with the mechanical metaphor that you are simply a source of action and you need to get things done and that's all there is. And we need to transform that back into a human activity. We have the domain of action and the question, what is action? I'm going to unpack our answer to that question in a generative way. It's focused on the practices of leadership in teams, not simply developmental modalities, but the fundamental practices that generate a team, that generate teamwork, and not simply as an approach, but in the ontological tradition, what is it that is essential, that is unavoidable? We also have the practices that we found are necessary for embodied learning. And so this is all about developing the body and the observer through practice to create value. So let's look at what we're dealing with here in the field of leadership is blindness. So if people want to be a chef, they go to cooking school and they learn the basic entities and actions and practices of being a chef. If you want to go be a lawyer, you go to law school. If you want to be a physician, you go to medical school. But very interesting that leadership is still a blind spot. With all the thousands of books and workshops, there's no fundamental, clear framework for answering the question, what is leadership and how do you do it? And so the generative perspective is a strong generative approach, which means we're going to identify what is essential. It's an action. You can see it, you can do it, you can learn it. And so we need new eyes to illuminate the blindness about leadership and teams and organizations. We refer to how you see that world or are blind in it as being an observer. And those of you who are trained by Newfield, you're familiar with the OAR model, where being a new observer opens up choices of new actions for new results. And that's one of the purposes of coaching. But we found not only these three elements, but we also have to include the actor. To coach someone to be a new observer, to have new choices, doesn't mean their body is able to do it. And so we talk about becoming a new actor. And the road to developing skills in embodied skill of leadership means we not only need to understand what leadership is, we need to embody the skills of doing it. We can't understand our way to playing the piano. We can't understand how to play tennis. We have to actually get on the court and play and show skill. And so one of the perspectives that we have found to simplify the complexity that people find with the human being is this distinction we use called self. And yes, it's about the self. If this was SELF, in English, we're talking about the same thing. Who and what are you as a human being? What is the observer that we can observe ourselves in our being and in our actions? The S stands for somatics. And somatics is a field that refers to mind and body together. It includes the body, but it's not just the body. Some coaching training does a lot of work with the body, but we draw from the somatic fields to be the observer of mind and body together. When the mind shifts, the body reacts. When the body has a reaction, the mind reacts. And so we bring that totality of awareness, because leadership, management, teamwork are performance arts. They're not conceptual domains. They are domains like dancing. You either dance well or you step on each other's feet. E stands for emotions and moods. And this has been developed to an extraordinary and beautiful level in the work of Newfield. And the point here is that in the domain of action, that emotions and moods open and close the possibilities for action. And so it's very important in our view of the world of leadership. And when I use the word leadership, everybody take a deep breath. This is one of those moments, because I'm probably triggering a lot of thoughts. But right now, when I use the word leadership, I don't want you to think of a technical field of technique. I want you to think of it as a fundamental act of a human being creating the future with others. And that's what these elements are, not just technical refinements, but to deal with leadership is to deal with life. To deal with leadership is to deal with yourself. To deal with leadership is to deal with others, and to deal with leadership is to deal with the world. And people need help knowing how to see that world and make choices in it. L stands for language. And there is a whole explosion of perspectives in the field of language that affect what you see, what you pay attention to, what you think, what assessments you make. It is the world of possibility as well as the world of action. And P stands for practice, because we are biological products of our practice. As human beings, we are what we have practiced. We have a lifetime of practice to be me, to be ourselves. And when we begin to see, I want to learn, I want to grow, I want to have a different experience of my body, my emotions, my language, and how they show me the world, how they allow me to act in the world, how I connect with other people, how I make things happen. I need new practices. New concepts will not do it. I need to learn the performance art. I need to learn to embody the skill. I need to, if I'm playing the piano, I need to practice the new skill. And leadership is the same. It is a unfolding level of steps of new conversations and new possibilities. We're never done learning, because leadership is about life, creating possibility, and organizing others to create shared futures together. H stands for our history, because it is the history of our practices that have shaped us to be the observer and actor that we are. They have created our SEL coherence. And so if we want to learn, if we want to grow, if we want to affect a client, if we want a team to shift, they have to create a new history. They have to be history makers, not victims of their history. And that is done in a very pragmatic, hands-on way of practices in these three dimensions of being aware of the story you are in, the language you use, the emotions and moods, the body, not only of yourself, but of the other. And this creates a space that is not simply you and me. It creates a space that begins to be shared. It begins to create the we space, where we begin to understand beyond the words, where we begin to feel the energy of the group. And this is fundamental to teamwork. These also identify domains that in the common sense of our culture are things that we are blind to, that we don't feel we have choice about. When we begin with the average person in our culture today, they're not aware that they have choices about their body reaction. They think, well, it just happens, that's it. They don't have choice about their emotions and moods. They just happen to me, that's it. They're not aware of the language that they use and how it shapes their world. They think they're just describing the world. These are blind spots. And so a huge part of the introduction into the generative world is to say, you can learn to have choice about your experience, about your body, about your emotions, your language. And it does require being a history maker of new practice. And so this brings us to the question of what is action. And what we have discovered over our more than 4 decades now is there is an anatomy. This is part of the ontological perspective. There is a structure to action that is essential, unavoidable, and it's in operation whether you're aware of it or not. It's not a choice. It's the structure of reality itself. And when we see from these eyes, it empowers us. Some people don't like the word structure. They think, oh, you're going to constrain my freedom. I don't want to be in a structure. I want to be free. And my answer to that is very simple. You have a skeleton. It's a structure. Guess what? The structure empowers you to have choice. It empowers you to take action. Or would you rather have no skeleton and be free? And so structure is empowerment, not limitation, when it's the right structure. The common sense of our culture is that action produces results. Of course, that's obvious. It's the common sense of our culture. The problem is when your actions don't produce the results you want, people don't know what to do. What they normally do is they do more. They do more of what's not working. And it tends not to be very effective in the world of organizations. The world is changing and I'm doing more of what I used to do. No. We need to change it. But we need a new interpretation of action itself to be able to see how to deal with that blind spot. The fundamental principle learned from these earlier years that was the revelation to me in my opening experience in the question of what is action. The answer to that question was action is commitment. Commitment is something you do. To say I will is an act. And it brings a level of commitment or not, depending how you live it. That's where action comes from. It comes from commitment. And this is an amazing revelation because commitment is an internal state. The act is not external. The action you take afterwards is external, but this is when we begin to blend the human being into the world of action. That we include the world of commitment. And so this is a place that we begin, we learn what are commitments and that shape action. Well, a request is a commitment. You've changed the future when you make a request, whether people say yes or no. You've changed the relationship. A promise is a commitment. An opinion you're going to act out of is a commitment. A declaration that I am taking a stand for something is a commitment. These are what shape action, and they are unavoidable. And where do the commitments get created? They get created in conversations. That's amazing. And my experience with these now for over 4 decades, and I've been challenging every audience I've spoken to for 40 years about this, that here's the claim. All actions and results come from prior conversations. All of them, the good ones, the bad ones. They come from conversations you have and conversations you don't have. They come from the conversations you do well and the conversations you do poorly. What does this do? It transforms leadership, teamwork, action, coordination into conversational skills. And now we're on the right planet to see the world of leadership and the world of coaching and of coaching leaders. It has to show up in conversations, but we need to understand what a conversation is. It is not simply words. It is listening that arises from the SCLPH, not the words. I can say the words "I will" and absolutely am convinced I'm not going to do what I said. The words did not carry the commitment. The commitment was within me. So everybody take a deep breath. Just take a moment here. I want you to really get the power for us as coaches to understand that what's being created in an organization, in a team, in a leader, in a person's life is being shaped by their conversations. And if you're going to change the result, you need to change the conversation. You need to see what's missing. And that is the observer of the generative perspective that we want to enable people to, this is where they begin to find their freedom. How do I learn the missing conversation? But of course, because of blindness, we may not see it. So part of the coaching conversation is to identify what are the kinds of conversations, and then we go into coaching. So with that deep breath, I want to give you another discovery of our work over 4 decades. One of the questions, we started here with the question, what is action? Another question that we found we could not avoid is, what is a human being? Because the blind spot in our culture is the answers we have to what is a human being are lacking. You go to a company and you see a department called human resources. Is that the answer to what a human being is? A resource? It's not a very good answer. It leaves out the human being. We transform them into things. And so what is most fundamental to being human? What is the most generative answer that we have found in our 40 years of answering what is a human being? And the answer we found is that what makes us human is that we care. That care is a deep, internal, emotional state that is what makes our commitments meaningful. It provides the energy of our aliveness. But care is not translatable into Portuguese or Spanish to one word. It's a concept that needs explanation. So I'm going to ask Marta to help explain what care is in these other cultures and languages.
Ok, thank you, Bob. Que bonito isso que o Bob está trazendo, porque em inglês a palavra care, ela tem duplo significado. Ela é ao mesmo tempo um substantivo, aquilo que nos importa, e também é um verbo, to care, que é cuidar. E nós, latinos, tanto no espanhol quanto no português, a gente optou por não traduzir a palavra care para ela ter esse sentido generativo, mas ela tem um significado para nós. Care seria, ao mesmo tempo, aquilo que nos importa mas também aquilo que nos importa e que a gente cuida. Então, essa é a explicação que é importante colocar, porque nós vamos deixar a palavra care para ter essa assinatura de que vem do discurso generativo, sempre conectando care com aquilo que nos importa, mas também aquilo que a gente cuida, justamente porque nos importa. Thank you, Bob. Hold on. Uma coisa mais, eu acho que o Bob falou uma coisa muito importante e algo que Maribel também fala muito lindamente, que o care não é uma ideia, não é algo que a gente pensa sobre, é algo que a gente sente. É isso que nos traz vitalidade, nos traz energia, nos traz uma sensação de vida. Como o Bob nos trouxe, é um estado interno. Thank you, Bob.
Beautiful. Beautiful. This important about care being a feeling is very important, because when we ask people what they care about most deeply in our culture today, most people don't know. They don't know what the deepest care of their life is. They talk about what they desire, but desire is not care. They talk about what they love, but love is not the care we're talking about. Of course you love your family. You want to take care of them. But what is the care that makes your life meaningful is a different question. And this is a foundation of how you stand in your world, how you stand in your life. It is a foundation of the source of power as a human being, and of course of leadership. And it's practical. It is the internal state that enables your aliveness. This makes me alive. I'm alive when I'm taking care of what I care about. I'm not just burdened with it. And so what makes it practical? This foundational perspective of care. Value does not exist without care. If someone says, hey, there's this product or service or offer that's very valuable, if you don't care about it, it has no value for you. Oh my God, the value's not in the thing out there. It's in the state inside someone. Satisfaction. Someone says, oh, this outcome is so satisfying, but if you don't care about it, you experience no satisfaction. And meaning. Someone says, this is very meaningful. And for you, if you don't care about it, it's not meaningful. And so we begin to see that care is a foundational layer of our humanity that is fundamental to our life, and it's fundamental to leadership, because care is how we wind up evaluating the results we produce. And in the leadership conversation and coaching conversation, the result is not only the outcome of your work, it's also the kind of life you are living. It's also the kind of life you are creating for others. And so we have learned that this is our generative answer to the question, what is a human being? We are creatures that care. And one of the challenges with that is we can connect to our care, we can be fed by our care, or we can be disconnected from our care, or not know what it is. Huge place of coaching is to help people find their care. Because if they don't have care, they don't have value, satisfaction, and meaning, they're probably chasing success, or they're living in darkness. So with that, then let's go to another deep generative question. What is a team? What is an answer to the question, what is a team that is generative? Something we can see and do that will generate what we recognize to be a team. And a team, in our generative tradition, it is a group of people who make a shared promise. The promise is not only shared, but it is owned by each person. Every team member needs to own the promise of the team, not just the team leader. It produces a whole different dynamic. This is one of our discoveries. And the team not only makes a shared promise, they organize their action to fulfill the promise and to satisfy the customer for the promise. Let me leave that up. And so we've answered in a very targeted way, a very important question. What is a team? And if you don't understand this, these are essentials. A team without a shared promise is, in our perspective, not a team. They are simply a group of people working side by side. If they don't know how to coordinate, they can't be a good team. If they're not focused on the satisfaction of the customer, they can get involuted, looking only at their internal team dynamics. And so this perspective creates a whole world of conversations. What is the conversation of making a shared promise? What are the roles in that conversation? How do you coordinate action? How do you manage client satisfaction? This is not developmental modality. This is the essence of the team itself. And so here are the practices that we introduce people to in the generative tradition is how to manage action as promises, how to manage capacity so that you don't overcommit. Overwhelm and overcommitment are huge issues. How teams manage their promises together. This is often missing. What are the rhythms of conversation? You see, teams and organizations need a rhythm of conversation. The conversations are like your lungs. The lungs need to breathe. The heart needs to beat. Key conversations need to happen as keeping the organization alive. They're often missing. How do we do planning based on commitment so we have human beings sharing the future? How do you manage projects and work with breakdowns? And what are the conversations of teams? We've identified 13 fundamental conversations that teams need to have, or they will have breakdowns. We also have conversations in the domain of leadership itself. The first set I showed you is all about teamwork and action. But what does leadership contribute to this world of the team? We have an anatomy of the conversations of organizations, value creation, making the distinction between waste and value, building alliances, designing winning games, strategy, generative leadership skills, the power of not knowing, presence, the power of politics. I'm giving you a sample. In addition to teams, we have identified 30 key practices for teams and leadership that without them, they're either having breakdowns or they're missing opportunities. And then we have conversations we've learned that go not only from me to we, but to the world. Most organizations have a mission. They want to do something in the world, but they need innovation. They need to be able to change the organization in a healthy way, to design bigger promises. They need to read the world to know what's going on there, how to make offers. In our work with coaches in generative leadership, the focus is always about what is your offer in the marketplace? What is the value of your offer? How do you grow your promise? What is excellence in execution? What is the conversational anatomy of leadership in the way that we did with action? How do we include a good life as the point of the game, not a life of sacrifice? And how do we take responsibility? And so this discipline is in evolution. It continues to grow and evolve. This is Maribel Gonzalez, who is the founder of IGL Latam and a colleague and partner. This is Samir Dua, who was the founder of IGL India and then IGL Asia. And in the US, Andrea Bordenka is taking the generative leadership to organizations as a consulting company. So we have an offer for you out of this conversation, if you are interested, where we have a free ebook on 4 practices that leaders and coaches don't know that will enable you in your coaching practice and in your personal path of growth. You can use the QR code here. Just go ahead and take a picture of it with your phone, and it will give you a link, and we'll give you a free ebook if you let us know where to send it. And so with that, the QR code should be in the chat. So I'm going to move on from this slide so you can use it there. And I'm going to wind up with my part of the speaking part, and we're going to open up for comments and questions here to say thank you. Again, thank you to ICF. Thank you to ICF Brazil. I want to thank my generative colleagues, Marta, Ana Paula, and Tita Barreto. And I love that word. And these are the links. They're also going to be put into the chat for you if you want to continue the conversation and explore how generative leadership can enable you as a coach to grow the world that you see, the world of actions that you see, that you can do as a coach, and that you can contribute to leaders and teams to produce organizations as a healthy place for human beings, creating the future, creating the world, creating good lives, rather than being ground up in the sacrifice of being mechanisms of production. And so with that, I'm going to open up here for comments and questions. Feel free to raise your hand or write your question into the chat. And how did we do at producing a new perspective and an addition into the world of coaching that is consistent with and builds on top of the ICF criteria, but is an example of deep questions of what is action, what is a human being, what is a leader, what is a team, what is a good life, and having a discipline where we can answer the question in a generative way that allows us to have action, to create it, not simply talk about it. And that's the invitation. That's what we're bringing to the world. And what we find in the learning with our students, and we're always learning with them, is that people do transform. They see new possibilities, they see new action, and they produce a different future, different results, and a different life. So let's open up for comments or questions. How did this land for you? Yes.
We already have like 4 questions in the chat. So let's begin.
Okay.
So one of the questions, let me see from who. Okay, it is up there. So I'm sorry if I don't say the name. In the context of the anatomy of action, could you dissect the following situation? A leader who wants the team to be more accountable, but keeps micromanaging or being authoritarian?
Yeah, this is a beautiful question. This is such a common tendency. This is a blind spot. This is an example of a leader in the SELPH who has a history of the way to be successful, the way to make things happen is to be in charge and to keep track of the details because I'm very competent. And it's a blind spot. They don't see that keeps the game very small. It keeps their team members small, and it fills their time that they should be spending on bigger issues. And so this is an inflection point for managers and leaders. to be able to begin to organize around making agreements for promises to be fulfilled rather than managing the activity. And you do that by building trust with your teammates. And it also allows the team members to grow because you're asking them to make promises. And one game that is very healthy in teams is let's learn how to make bigger promises because we're here anyway. Why don't we continue to learn and grow as we're doing our work? And so this is an example of a blind spot in which the leader probably has never seen a different perspective, has never seen a different way to do it. And when you look to invite a leader to look at their style and change it, sometimes they get triggered and defensive. Sometimes they will resist a new interpretation. So the way to begin in our experience is find a problem that they want to solve, that it makes sense for them to change their perspective as part of the solution. He wants the team to be more accountable is the clue, or she, whoever the manager is, that they want more accountability. Why? What's missing? What's the breakdown? And then we can begin to say, oh, what if we approach this in a different way? And that begins to open up the possibility of innovation, of learning. And we often need to help the leader go through an emotional transformation. One of the common breakdowns with leaders is they're afraid to show they're not the expert. They think that the leader is the expert, and that's a mistake. The people who run a corporation of 100,000 people are not the expert for everything. It's a different role than being the expert. Being an expert is being an expert. Being a leader is different. Being a leader is the choreographer of the conversations to get a promise fulfilled and create value, in which maybe you bring in experts, but you don't have to be the expert. The people who think the leader is the expert will probably be promoted to one level and they'll never rise beyond it because they're trapped in their interpretation of the job. How does that land? Whoever, hopefully that gives you a place to make the invitation to this leader for a new perspective. Thank you.
Great, Bob. Now we have a question from Edilene. Edilene pergunta, fazendo uma analogia do care, pode ser sentido como filhos, algo que nos importa e que cuidamos?
Yes, that's actually love, and love and care are related. And so we have different care in different domains. And so for domains of family, love. Domains of relationship, love. But when we go to the domain of your work, when we go to the domain of your life at large, that includes the love, but it's a different question. And the question is, what makes your life meaningful? And you can love your family and live a life and say, I didn't live a meaningful life. I didn't orient myself in a wider way beyond that. And this is a beautiful question because this is an example of the blind spot of our culture around care, that it's a different question. One way that you can see the profound power of care in some other traditions, in Chinese medicine, for example, one of my areas of study about leadership in life, they talk about destiny. They say you are born with a destiny. You are born and you are you. You're not a horse. You're not a dolphin. You're not someone else. You're you. And that you that you are has a destiny to manifest, to be healthy and full, and to fully bloom. And the issue that people have in life is they don't know their destiny, so they try very hard to be something else. It's like the eagle decides they have to be as good as the dolphins and take swimming lessons. And then they suffer. And so destiny is finding who you are. But part of finding your destiny is to find your care, because if you don't know what you care about, then you have other default stories about, well, I need to work hard and I need to be successful and I need to please people. And we never find that place of home. I know who I am. I know what I was born for. I know what my life is about. And it's not about achievement. We can work as hard as we want. We don't decide on achievement, but we can decide that our work, our life, our purpose gives us meaning. That's care, is the emotional feeling of how being aligned in that conversation. Now, our experience with this exploration with our students is that people take six months to 2 years before they begin to settle with the question, because it's a new question for our culture. It's a blind spot in our culture. We didn't grow up with this question. And so don't use the question like, I need to have a good answer, or I need to have the answer. This is a kind of question that I call an existential question. There's no right answer. The question only opens possibilities for choice. And this is the challenge of life. When you begin to see your life as choice, what are you going to choose? And care, when it is beginning to be that embodied sense of who I am, what I'm committed to, what is my purpose, that allows me to choose in my possibilities. In our coaching, we find the first year is often more about getting beyond all my breakdowns, getting beyond my fear, getting beyond my limiting concepts. But the care is like the light at the end of the tunnel. It's the portal to a meaningful life. And so we keep the question alive. And it's a question for a lifetime. You'll never close the question with an answer, because tomorrow you get to wake up to a new day. You may have a new answer, but it lives inside you. When you work with leaders and teams, the question is, do you care about your work? What is your work if you don't care about it? Activity, burden, grind. We can always find care in our work. When I was in my Silicon Valley story, I didn't take on the transformation of the organization and the program manager experience to get promoted. I did it because what was meaningful for me was the frustration of seeing all this human ability being wasted. And that's what led me on this path. The generative leadership is about finding our awakening to our power to create, and then using that power as leaders, as coaches, as professionals to create a world that we care about. Because in a very real sense, we are creating the world that's there now. And if we are, then why don't we create a better one? That's the invitation, is to find our power in action, not only alone, but together. You see, the reason teams exist is to make bigger promises than you can make alone. Think of what you want to have happen in the world. And I would almost guarantee you it can't happen if you try to do it alone. You have to have a team. You have to have a community. You have to build an organization. And that's what generative leadership is about, is to help people on that journey and to empower you to have your coaching impact enable others to create a meaningful, healthy future that we care about, based on action as fulfilling our humanity, not as sacrificing our humanity to a mechanical demand. How are we doing? Okay.
More questions, Bob.
Okay.
So, uma pergunta da Lindevani. Caro Bob, na sua experiência de prática do coaching ontológico, como tem sido a aderência de altos executivos a essa abordagem, considerando que muitos deles demonstram certa dificuldade de expressar suas emoções e vulnerabilidades?
Yes. Well, it depends how high an executive we're talking about. If you go to the C-suite, I find the people in the C-suite not very open to learning. They sometimes they'll be excited about innovating a culture change, but in general, the place you start with is, I'm already the best in the company. I'm already at the top. I don't need to learn anything. And so it's a challenging place to start, to find, well, what is the care that would open coaching being valuable for you? But the people one level down from the C-suite, they're open for learning. And because there's opportunity, there's opportunity through learning. And so my experience with working with senior people, coaching is only relevant if they have a breakdown. They don't do it just for entertainment. They don't do it because it's a good idea. They have some concern, they have some breakdown. It's what is true for all of us. Our breakdowns trigger our attention. There's some dissatisfaction. And when you begin to work with emotional competence, for example, nobody wants to buy emotional competence. What they want to do is solve their breakdown. What they do is they want to take care of something that's not being taken care of. And so we call this the relevance story. Why would you want to learn about emotions? Because if you don't learn about emotions, you're going to continue to have pain. You're going to continue to have dissatisfaction. You're going to continue to have this problem. And learning about emotions may be a surprise to you, and you may be a little fearful, because in our culture, we don't have public conversations about our internal states. This is the big blindness. Not only are we culturally been conditioned to a mechanical worldview, we tend to have everything about our work relationships to be about external action and results. And so even talking about internal states can be very triggering. So how do you bring it up? Because it's relevant to a breakdown that they're facing, to a concern they already have. And if you can make that connection, then there will be some kind of opening for, is this learning you're willing to take on? And senior leaders have a lot of weight on their shoulders. They tend to be lonely. They tend to be exhausted. CEOs only last about 2 years on average in the US. It's go, go, go. And they need help. So there's definitely places that they're going to feel they could be open for help. But the other aspect is senior leadership is defined by the power they have. They can do things that people that are not as senior cannot do. And so it's an invitation to say, you have all this power. Are you making good use of it? Are you producing a good result? Are you producing a culture? Are you leaving a legacy? Are you making an impact in the world? And some leaders are ready for that conversation, and are ready not only for their own learning, but to see how it can enable their organization. Hopefully, that's helpful.
Great, Bob. Thanks. We have 3 more questions. I don't know if we'll have time for that.
Let's take one, and I wanted you to have time to wrap up. So let's do a quick question.
Eu gosto de ser muito justa, então eu vou por ordem de chegada das perguntas, tá? Nós temos uma pergunta do Evaldo. Ele já fez há tempos essa pergunta e diz: dá para dizer que não existem ações sem conversas?
Let me say it this way. When the body moves, sometimes it's an action and sometimes it's a reaction. The reaction is just totally physiological. The reaction can have a root in conversations of experience earlier in life, like trauma. But when people are taking action without it being dominated by reaction, yes, there's always a conversation. There's always a habit. There's always a story. Sometimes the conversation happened 30 or 40 years ago, but there's still a conversation. And you can always access the action and its quality or its lack of quality with the conversation. What do you think you're doing? Why are you doing it? Is it working for you? There's a whole set of questions that can begin to open up to find the conversation, to allow people to see choice. Because when we're in habit, and interpretation can also be a habit, the action can be seen of, well, this is obvious, or this is the only choice, or there is no other choice. And what we want to do is always open up a new observer to say, no, you have choices here. Is this the best choice you have? And are you willing to take a look? And how would it be meaningful for you? How would it take care of what you care about? Okay, so based on timing, I'm going to let Marta wrap up for the timing. I'm happy to stay longer, but I want to respect the schedule of the event.
Thank you, Bob. A gente ficou com 2 ou 3 perguntas sem responder, a gente sente muito por isso. Eu acho que, de alguma forma, o Bob estava trazendo isso na fala, né, das respostas. Muito importante, a gente viu que o link estava com uma pequena quebra, isso foi no copiar e colar, mas a gente já arrumou, botamos ela embaixo. Por favor, cliquem, recebam seu certificado, trazendo CCUs, mas principalmente também avaliar o evento, ver o que vocês acharam, compartilhar. As coisas boas a gente tem que compartilhar mesmo, e essa festa que a gente fez aqui juntos, né? Sem vocês isso não seria possível. Queria agradecer muito a presença do Bob, com essa disponibilidade imensa de seguir compartilhando, não só compartilhando, ele não fala isso, mas eu acho que é um dever falar. Isso que vocês estão vendo atrás dele não é um fundo de tela, isso é a biblioteca dele, é um voraz consumidor de conhecimento, livros, entrelaçar conhecimentos e criar mapas, e para mim isso é uma das grandes belezas que o Bob nos traz, que é ser um eterno aprendiz, está sempre criando, com esse olhar generativo que, apesar de vir, né, de um engenheiro norte-americano, é uma metodologia que eu nunca vi tão humana, mas gerando resultados concretos no mundo. Eu queria agradecer a Ideal Latam, em nome da Glória, né, que está aqui representando Maribel e toda a equipe de Latam, que somos mais de, eu acho que 30, 35, 40 coaches. por terem essa visão de trazerem a IDL, né, o Instituto de Liderança Generativa, para a América Latina, e a Maribel tem uma visão muito clara de ter essa legião de coaches e consultores generativos na América Latina, para a gente sair de um lugar que a gente sempre se colocou, ou nos colocaram e a gente ficou, de que nós não somos terceiro mundo, nós temos muito para entregar para o mundo, nós temos corpo, nós temos alma, e a gente pode ter muita voz no mundo. E se a gente pensar que a gente é periferia do mundo, né, assim como outros tantos países, que a gente possa levar a possibilidade de gerar uma diferença e um impacto gigante no mundo. E descendo mais uma voltinha nessa água, nessa cascata, né, as minhas companheiras de IGL Latam no Brasil, nós, as gurias, né, eu, Ana, Tita, que também temos esse compromisso em conversas, né, de fazer com que o Brasil, diferente dos latinos que falam espanhol, que a gente possa trazer também isso para o Brasil de uma forma consistente, porque o que a gente quer é ter uma comunidade que quer realmente gerar impacto no mundo com muito significado e com muito sentido. Então, os links estão no chat, eu já vi que tem um monte de mensagens ali. Eu estou muito feliz da gente estar fazendo esse movimento e ele é parte de algo grande que está para acontecer e a gente precisa de muita gente para vir com a gente. Então, estão todos convidados para essa festa. Queria também deixar o convite, a gente ainda tem, né? A gente está no último dia da ICW, mas a gente ainda tem 2 grandes eventos, um à 1h30 da tarde, né? Promovido pela ICF Brasil, que é Coaching and Abnormality, com o Ned Lynch e a Yaci Rios. E também às 17 horas, fechando essa grande semana, Sabores e Saberes da ICW com o Comitê de Educação da ICF Brasil. Então é isso, pessoal. Meu pedido é que todo mundo abra seu microfone, que a gente possa dar um tchau assim, falando, né? Para a gente também ficar um pouquinho mais perto. E é isso, pessoal.
Tchau, 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 tchau.
Obrigada.
Tchau.
Bom final de semana.
Tchau, boa tarde, tchau,
Tchau.
Bye, bye. Tchau, tchau.
Bye, bye.
Sucesso a todos.
Tchau,
Sucesso.
tchau.
Bye,
Beijo.
Brasil.
Tchau.
Tchau, tchau. Tchau, tchau. Beijinho,
Tchau,
beijinho.
tchau.
Tchau, tchau.
Saúde, sucesso.
Valeu. Tchau.